Great. Okay. Yeah. So as I was saying, this work was done as part of a DSbD project called MoatE, and the task was to build a commercial demonstrator system for edge computing with Morello as a secure server in there. We did it on Linux Morello, and all of the work is integrated into a Yocto distribution. The user space packages in there will be able to be open sourced into the Meta Morello open source layer very soon. There's just minor modifications needed. So the University of Manchester had sort of two blocks of work in MoatE, but I'm just going to talk to you today about one, which was enabling secure networking. So enabling VPN, we chose WireGuard, and Linux firewall Netfilter. So we chose WireGuard because it has about an order of magnitude fewer lines of code than like either IPsec or OpenVPN. And it's an in-kernel implementation, so the overhead of doing the porting was actually quite minimal because we're using the Linux Morello hybrid kernel, so there's only really the user space configuration tools to do the port. But a lot of the usable configurations for WireGuard require Netfilter. It's not exactly a build dependency, but in order to get the most of it and to certainly run all of the tests, you need to have Netfilter there as well, which is useful anyway for network security, right? If you want to do forwarding or address translation and have packet filtering stuff. So we needed to put Netfilter as well, which was more of an issue. So Netfilter is the de facto standard firewall tool for Linux, and it consists of sort of a front-end set of user space tools, NFT and iptables NFT for inputting commands to create firewall rules. And then underneath, it uses netlink sockets to be able to communicate with the kernel. And you can form really quite complex netlink packets at once. You can make quite large, complex configurations with the user space tools. And because it's so configurable and that Netfilter is quite a large and complex system, this has led to many vulnerabilities being identified, although not quite as many as V8, I guess. Yeah, so there's recently been a good few proven exploits published where you can get privilege escalation. So it's quite useful to give this CHERI memory safety, I guess. Some of the issues that we saw with porting, the main real issue was the fact that Netfilter in its user space API headers doesn't expose kernel pointers, but has placeholders for kernel pointers in there. And in the hybrid ABI, where we've got the user space thinking things are 128 bits, these pointers, and in the kernel, they're actually still 64 bits. So this caused a discrepancy and weird padding problems and alignment issues with these netlink packets. So we needed to create a new type for these, which change their size dependent on whether you're using the PureCap user space ABI or not. And this sounds like it's a trivial fix, like in these headers, but actually because of the levels of indirection between the nested netlink packets and the structures that form in the kernel and the commands in themselves in the user space, this actually took quite a while to hunt down the source of the problem. So there were some other issues with doing the port we saw from the user space tools, really. They contain cached versions of the kernel headers inside the user space packages. So when we made the modifications and we tried to build against them, we found that the build was broken when you try and build against custom kernel header locations. And this is because of general software rot, I guess, that nobody's testing against certain really non-standard build configurations. And yeah, this caused us some headaches. sort of related to this, there were some issues with muscle libc in the way that it deals with headers, multiple definitions of things in headers. And also we saw some issues with the kernel self-tests related to like some with not having Perl, some with having packages that didn't have the functionality that we needed for the tests, issues with compiling the tests themselves outside of the kernel. And there are several persistent IP tables or nftables failures that actually, they're not errors, they're just the ways that the tests are set up and the package versions of the user space tools that we've got that are doing the tests that show kind of false failures, false negatives, I guess. So these are some of the issues that we had with porting. But we got everything working and got a couple of Morellos set up, talking to each other, and we put 100 gig Intel NICs in there. And there was no problems getting the NICs working on Linux Morello, really. There was some AArch64 related issues, but not Linux Morello related issues. And we were able to achieve about 45 gig through those links, which is, I think that's what you would expect, really, given the 4-core machine. WireGuard, there was about an 11% latency overhead when using WireGuard in Linux Morello, as opposed, well, compiled with the PureCap user space ABI, as opposed to not, although with a lot less jitter. I'm not able to diagnose, I've not been able to diagnose where this is coming from, what is exactly causing these overheads at the minute. That needs a bit more work. So there's still a few open questions from this work. So, you know, what protections are we affording beyond like traditional network security? What more do we need to do in the kernel? Obviously, because we're still using a hybrid kernel, chunks of that are not covered, right? So we would like to test on CHERI Linux, which is giving us spatial safety within the kernel. But even still, you know, do we need to have temporal safety in there to really iron out those Netfilter bugs that we'd seen? Yeah, a lot of the exploits were use after freeze in socket buffers, and so yeah, it needs testing really on CHERI Linux with capabilities in the kernel. Also, you know, what does the PureCap kernel mean for the porting effort? You know, because I saw that discrepancy in the structures between kernel space and user space because of the hybrid ABI, right? But then if we go to the PureCap ABI, the PureCap kernel, where everything's aligned, then what new challenges do I have from that? Because I already see problems that from not having correct user space packages with test coverage and things like this. So what are the new dependencies from that? Would the Intel 100 gig NIC work just out of the box in that? You know, these are interesting open questions. So, yeah, please find me to discuss more. The patches are already available, but as I said, the user space packages will be updated very soon. Yeah, thank you.